So today is March 17th, 2025. We're reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 60. Lord Krishna teases Queen Rukmini, and we're reading text 45. Twak smashuroma nakakesha pinadamantar Mam shasti rakta kumivit kapapitavatam Jivakshavam bhajati kanta matir vimuda Yate padabja makaranda majigrati shri Twak, with skin, shmashru, whiskers, roma, bodily hair, naka, nails, kesha, and hair on the head, pinadam, covered, antaha, inside, mamsa, flesh, asti, bones, rakta, blood, krimi, worms, vit, stool, kappa, mucus, pitta, bile, vatam, and air, jivat, living, shavam, a corpse, bhajati, worships, kanta, as husband or lover, matihi, whose idea, vimuda, totally bewildered, ya, who, te, your, para abja, of the lotus feet, makarandam, the honey, ajigrati, not smelling, stri, woman. So this is again Rukmini responding to Krishna with all of his arguments as to why she should leave him and marry somebody else. BBT translation. A woman who fails to relish the fragrance of the honey of your lotus feet becomes totally befooled unless she accepts as her husband or lover a living corpse covered with skin, whiskers, nails, head hair, and body hair, and filled with flesh, bones, blood, parasites, feces, mucus, bile, and air. You see, the Bhagavatam doesn't just talk about the nastiness of women's bodies, it also talks about the nastiness of men's bodies. Yes? Yeah. Okay. BBT purport. Here, Lord Krishna's chaste wife makes a quite unequivocal statement about material sense gratification based on the physical body. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti comments as follows on this verse. On the authority of the statement Savai Pati Syad Anubhava Swayam Akuta Bhava Swayam, he indeed should become one's husband who can remove all fear. Now that statement is from the 5th canto. It's from the prayers of Lakshmi Devi to the Lord in the form of Kamadev. So of course Rukmini is also Lakshmi Devi. And so this is the statement of Rukmini in another manifestation, that a husband should be one who can remove all fear. Sri Krishna is the real husband for all women at all times. Thus, a woman who worships someone else as her husband simply worships a dead body. What did Rukmini call such a woman? Vimudha, a fool. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti comments further. Rukmini thus considered that although the sweetness of Lord Krishna's lotus feet is well known, and although he possesses an eternal body full of knowledge and bliss, foolish women reject him. An ordinary husband's body is covered on the outside by skin and hair. Otherwise, being filled with blood, feces, flesh, bile, and so on, it would be overwhelmed with flies and other vermin attracted by its bad smell and other offensive qualities. This state reminds me, many, many years ago, Bhakti Gopal Prabhu was giving class here, and he was talking about how in the operating theater, the surgeons are cutting up a body, and yet the males and female surgeons and nurses in the operating theater are flirting with each other at the same time as they're cutting up a body and seeing all this inside. Going on, those who have no practical experience of the beauty and purity of Krishna or of Krishna consciousness may be confused by such uncompromising denunciations of material bodily gratification. But those who are enlightened in Krishna consciousness will be enlivened and enthused by such absolutely truthful statements. Okay, so I'm going to read just the commentary of Srila Jiva Goswami. Those persons not qualified for a relationship with you or your devotees, even in mind, should be completely condemned. She shows how they are living corpses by enumerating the bodily features. Because of seeing only the bodily elements inside and outside, the woman who considers a man to be a lover is only seeing a corpse. The insides are held together, panadam, by the skin, etc. Otherwise, the contents will be covered with flies and insects attracted to the foul odor. If the innards of the body were to come outside, people would need to take sticks to drive away dogs and crows. You, on the other hand, in any of your forms, do not have such physical elements in your body, since you are famous for having a form of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Since your having a material body is denied in the scriptures, and I have personally realized it, Rukmini would say, that some of your forms are material is not approved by the Vedas. The Vedas testify that those forms are all made of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. She makes this statement in order to reject the disgusting material body according to her realization. Krishna said previously that she had a form similar to his for pastimes, verse 9. Now the way verse 9 was translated was that Krishna didn't say it, but he thought it. So he was thinking, I have this form for my pastimes, and my wife Rukmini has a similar spiritual form. So this is very important now. However, criticizing bodies in this way, she wanted to enjoy with him without such realizations, not in her present body. She desired to give up her body as if it were soiled clothing in order to be qualified to worship him. In other words, her mood in saying this was, I'm just fallen, and I need to let go of this fallen body in order to have a body suitable to worship you. Qualification is in steps. That's also very important. Kubja, while possessing her previous body, went into the inner chambers because she suddenly became qualified. In other words, Kubja did not enjoy with Krishna in a material body. Some gopis gave up their previous body, and he quotes from 10:29:9. Some of the gopis, however, could not manage to get out of their houses, and instead they remained home with eyes closed, meditating upon him in pure love. End quote. Because they gave up their previous bodies while attaining qualified bodies, Pingala criticized her present body. All women should be attracted to you as expressed in verse 42. The Shrutis say in their prayers, anyone, quote, this is from 1087:35, anyone who even once turns his mind toward you, the ever-blissful soul of all existence, no longer dedicates himself to serving family life at home, which simply robs a man of his good qualities. All of us are fixed on you alone, but have not attained a form similar to yours. What to speak of persons who oppose you like Shishupal? And she's mentioning that because Krishna had said that she should marry Shishupal. Twak samshuroma nakakesha binadamantar mam sasti rakta krimivid kapapitavatam jivak javam bhajati kanta matir vimudha yate padabja makarandam ajigrati stri. A woman who fails to relish the fragrance of the honey of your lotus feet becomes totally befooled, and thus she accepts as her husband or lover a living corpse covered with skin, whiskers, nails, head hair, and body hair, and filled with flesh, bones, blood, parasites, feces, mucus, bile, and air. So we used to have this play based on a story Prabhupada would tell, Liquid Beauty, where this man's attracted to a beautiful woman, and she wasn't very interested in him. So she said, come back in a week. And during that week, she took emetics to make her vomit and purgatives to make her defecate. And so she was vomiting and passing so much stool that she became very skinny. Yes, we actually had this practical experience one time in India. And there's, you can see a photograph. At that time, I was like, you know. So then after a week, he came to see her, and there was this, you know, she looked like she was 90 years old. He says, where's that beautiful girl? And she said, oh, I'm that girl. I have separated the elements of my beauty. And she had kept the vomit and the poop in pots. And that this was the nature of the body. So Rukmini is saying this also about the male form. That it's just these things. The main idea here, the main concept here, as Prabhupada would often say, is in order to enter into fire, you have to be fire. In order to enter into the water, you have to be like water. That we have to become qualified. This is the main point of Srila Jiva Goswami, that in order to associate with Krishna, we have to become purified. So Krishna does not have a material body. This is the second time that Srimati Rukmini Devi has talked about relishing the honey of the Lord's lotus feet. Krishna does not have a material body, and we cannot impose the material on the spiritual. Rather, we have to actually cultivate our own actual spiritual nature. So, of course, Krishna says, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatvata twakta deha punar janma naitimam eti sorjuna. If we actually understand that Krishna's form is Satchidananda, he is without veins. He doesn't have bones and mucus and bile and like that. His body is completely spiritual, although he appears in this planet. We have religions like Islam that say God can't incarnate because he's so different from this world. We say, yes, he's different from this world, and yet he can incarnate. And in order to associate with him, therefore, one also has to have a similar body. And Srila Jiva Goswami is saying, it might look like the women in Krishna's Leelas had material bodies, but they didn't. He said Kubja actually transformed her body before she was with Krishna, and the gopis who still weren't completely purified, they couldn't join the Rasa Leela. They had to give up that material body. So there's several different ways in which we can impose the material on the spiritual. I don't know if I've listed all of them, but I'm going to try to look at all I could think of. One is materialistic religion, to be a prakrita bhakta. Another is to become a prakrita sahajya. Another is to become offensive and a mayavadi. And another is improper mixing of rasas, which is very related to today's verse, which Rupa Goswami quotes in this connection. So first there's prakrita bhakta, to be a materialistic devotee. Most of the religions in the world, at least for the majority of their followers, are preaching materialistic religion. You'll find genuine religion still there, but it's not very open. You have to kind of look for it. You follow? You know, you go to most mosques and synagogues and churches, and you're going to find you are this body. This is you. And you are supposed to be a good, righteous person in this world for the glory of God. This particular idea also, I'm very sorry to say, exists in our Hare Krishna movement as well. Thinking that Varnashram supersedes Bhakti, that Varnashram is more important than Bhakti. It's in our movement. I have heard devotees say, you know, if you're a good wife, you're a good husband, you're a good mother, that will bring you to love of Krishna. And Prabhupada directly, personally told me that is not true. When we met with Prabhupada in 1976 in New York, and my oldest son, Murari, was 1.5 years, he was sitting on my lap very quietly. He was a well-behaved child. And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, just like this mother is loving her son without expectation of return, in the same way one should love Krishna. And my father said, will loving her son help her to love Krishna? And Prabhupada said, no. But loving Krishna will help her to love her son. And I cannot count how many times I've heard devotees preach that if we have, loving family relationships, that will help us to love Krishna. That is not true. That is materialistic religion. It is thinking that our material relationships based on the body are spiritual. As I say, that the majority of religions in the world, for the majority of their adherents, have this kind of a conception. You know, I'm going to marry somebody in my church, and then I'm married to them eternally in the spiritual world, and we're going to be resurrected in our same bodies, yes? You know, and then of course you say, well, suppose I didn't like my body, you know, my nose is too big, my hair is too thin, do I have to live with that eternally? You know, ridiculous. But this is very common, having a materialistic religion. Then there's kind of another side, which is what we call prakriti, means materialistic, prakriti sahajya. So the word sahajya means what is natural. Dham means birth, to do what is natural, but they're thinking in a materialistic way. Now, there's quite interesting here. So I don't know if you're all familiar with David Haberman. He's a disciple he's a former U.S. professor who's a disciple in Pushti Marg, and he's very associated with the Hare Krishna movement. I've actually heard him speak on the Vyasasan in Chaupati, and I met him recently at Govardhan Eco Village. So he wrote this wonderful book about the history of Raganuga sadhana and how it's been misunderstood. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which Srila Prabhupada quotes frequently, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 12295. Seva sadaka rupena, siddha rupena chatrahi, tad bhava lipsuna karya, vraja lokanusarata. Following after the inhabitants of Vraja, one should perform service in one's physical body and in one's siddha body with a desire for a particular bhava. So this is detailing the practice of Raganuga sadhana. And when Srila Prabhupada translates this verse, both in the Nectar Devotion and in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he talks about one should do this service both in the state of bondage and in the state of liberation. So there was one personality called Rupa Kaviraj. And Rupa Kaviraj interpreted this verse to mean that one should not only meditate within on the pastimes of the Lord, but with one's external body, one should also be imitating the pastimes of the Lord. So say your sadhaka deha and your siddha deha, that, in other words, this became interpreted that you should, if you're meditating on the gopis internally, then you dress up like a gopi and you act like a gopi externally. Now, this particular philosophy was defeated, and there was a council in Jaipur that made it illegal to behave this way. But this still goes on, yes? This concept. And Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary on this verse, explains our genuine Gaudiya Vaishnava understanding. And I'm just reading from part of his commentary. One should perform mental service in one's siddha rupa, following after the examples of Sri Radha, Lalita, Vishaka, Sri Rupa, Manjari, and others. In one's physical body, one should perform services using one's body, following after persons such as Sri Rupa and Sanatan Goswamis situated in Vraja. So you see the distinction? Internally, one may be meditating on Rupa Manjari, but externally, one is doing practices following Rupa Goswami. Does everybody understand? Is this clear? Yes? Following after them, one should perform service using one's physical body. Some modern persons following the Sauramya Sampradaya think that since persons such as Radha did not perform services such as surrendering to Guru, following Ekadasi vows, and serving Shalagram and Tulsi, we also need not do these activities. That idea is defeated here. So the idea, and actually Srila Rupa Goswami says that one performing devotional service that is not approved by the Shastras just causes a disturbance in society. So basically, Prakriti Sahajya, it means you're doing some, of course we should mention that Rupa Kaviraj did say that in order to do that practice, one has to actually be qualified and properly initiated, but it was still a bogus practice. Something that was never approved by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He always said, externally, you follow the principles of Vaidhi Bhakti, and internally one meditates on the Lord. And you also remember that it was noted in the commentary of Srila Jiva Goswami that these things are done in steps. One should not even be immaturely or prematurely meditating on internal pastimes with a siddha deha. One has to have spontaneous realization. It can't be imitated. Otherwise, that also becomes a materialistic conception that's put on devotional service. So there's two ways you can put a materialistic, at least two ways, on devotional service. One is to say that mundane activities are transcendent, and another is to say that I have realization beyond my actual capacity. I am really in a transcendental position, and my body is in a transcendental position. Now, these materialistic conceptions lead to offenses and Mayavad philosophy, because if my materialistic activities are transcendental, or if I can imagine that I'm transcendental before I'm ready, then I also may say that Krishna is materialistic, that Krishna has a material body. Does this make sense to everybody? And this is part of Mayavadi philosophy, that God's body, that God has a body of flesh and blood. And there are also main religions in the world that preach like this, that God incarnates and then he has a body that suffers. And this is a great offense to the Lord. This material body that's disgusting in so many ways, it's the reason it's disgusting is that it is a gross manifestation of our false ego. A pure devotee who has given up the false ego spiritualizes their body. And their body, although appearing physical in this world, is not acting physically. Therefore, the bodies of the great devotees are put into samadhi rather than cremated. And therefore, we take any association with their bodies as something transcendental. Now, another consideration here is improper mixing of rasas. Because what Rukmini is saying here is typical for a statement made in the ghastly rasa. So an example given by Srila Rupa Goswami of the ghastly rasa in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 4.7, 1 through 14. It's one of those verses there. I didn't have time to look up the specific number. Quote, when a person develops attraction for the Lord, how can he be attracted to this body made of flesh, smelling of raw meat, composed of thick blood, covered by skin? So this is Srila Rupa Goswami's example of a ghastly rasa. My dear friends, we need to make sure we distinguish between mundane aversion, which is the same as sense gratification, and ghastly rasa. A mundane aversion is just bhogatyaga. I'm attached to something, then I'm averse to it. I'm attached to it, I'm averse to it. I'm attached to it, I'm averse to it. Any of us who've been in this Hare Krishna movement long enough, we had experience of seeming renunciates sitting on the Vyasa-san, talking about how disgusting bodies were, and then going after one of those bodies for sense gratification. Yes? Yes? In fact, the people who talked about that the most were the people who ran after it the fastest. So aversion is not, this ghastly rasa is not aversion. It's ecstatic. It's ecstatic, and it's just seeing the disgusting nature of false ego, of a rebellion against Krishna. So Srila Rupa Goswami explains that there's compatibilities of rasa. There's what's compatible and incompatible. And his example is like, if you have sweet rice, if you have something sweet, you don't put something bitter or pungent with it, right? One time at a feast, they were serving, you know how sometimes at a feast, the people who are serving prasadam don't really look at what they're doing? You've all had this experience, you're like taking your plate down the table and people are just putting stuff on the plate. So it actually happened here in New Goloka many years ago, that at the Sunday feast I got a plate of prasadam, and on top of the sweet rice somebody put fig chutney. So if you mix things like that, what happens is you don't get rasa anymore. You get ras abas. Abas means a shadow or reflection of taste. So you don't get pleasure anymore if things are mixed improperly. Yes? I was at a temple once where the cook made avocado halva. So that's an improper mixing. She also made a sabji. She boiled eggplant. Don't ever boil eggplant. Has to be cooked at a high temperature. So she boiled eggplant with plantain, cooking bananas, and red cabbage. So she took red cabbage, plantain, and eggplant and boiled it. So that's improper mixing. And then when you go to eat it, you don't get a taste. You get a semblance of a taste. The taste becomes spoiled. So you have to know how to mix things. Part of cooking is knowing how to mix things. So Sri Rupa Goswami says if you mix things improperly, it won't work. And he gives whole lists of what can and cannot be mixed. And the reason he's bringing it up is that as one progresses in bhakti, one should be doing the activities according to one's taste, and one has to know what's going to nourish and not nourish one's taste. That's why he's talking about it. So he's talking about that the conjugal rasa is incompatible with the ghastly rasa. And he gives this example. This is in the section of 481 to 85, but that's not the specific verse. Messenger, my youth is fleeting, so please arrange for me to have loving play with Krishna today. So this is an improper mixing. To talk about, I have a material body that's going to get old and decrepit, so let me go enjoy with Krishna. That's improper mixing of ghastly and conjugal. He gives another example. O dark-limbed lover, because of my body of blood and flesh, I am not suitable for you, but accept me anyway. So these are two examples of improper mixing of ghastly and conjugal. Now you may say, well, what about today's verse? Isn't that what Rukmini Devi is doing? Sri Rupa Goswami gives today's verse by Srimati Rukmini Devi as an exception. He also lists a number of cases that look like improper mixing of rasa, but aren't. Just like there's chutney, where you're mixing sweet and spicy, but it has a very nice rasa. Or we have sweet and sour sabji. You're mixing sweet and sour, but it has a very nice rasa. So sometimes there are things that look like improper mixing, but they're not. So he gives a number of different situations. One is when the vishaya or the ashraya are different. Now, the vishaya means the object of the rasa. What the rasa is directed toward. Ashraya is the person relishing the rasa. So here he quotes in 4871, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he quotes today's verse of 1060-45. And he says, here Rukmini's ghastliness, her vishaya, her object for that, are materialistic men like Shishupal. And her honey of the lotus feet, her conjugal, is for Krishna. So because there's two different objects, it's not an improper mixing. So as we noted, our acharyas are telling us, Srila Jiva Goswami is telling us that we need to develop this in steps. So what are our steps, practically speaking? So if we're still actually materialistic ourselves, we may need to marry a husband with hair on his head and bones and blood and flesh and covered with skin. That may be necessary. We're not going to go to 18, 20, 25-year-old women and say, all of you marry Krishna. We also tried that in our Krishna consciousness movement, by the way. And it was a catastrophe. For most. With some exceptions, like Mother Krishna Priya, who decided that she was going to marry Krishna on Lord Nityananda's appearance day 40 years ago. And she stuck to that. But for most people, that's not practical. You follow? Like I was just hearing today, Prabhupada saying how sannyas is forbidden in Kali Yuga because nobody's just going to pick up old clothes from the ground and live in the caves of mountains. So for most people, they need to marry. They need to marry a wife, a husband in this world. However, that should be done with the consciousness that I am a soul, and I am not trying to enjoy matter, but I'm doing this as a service for Krishna. I'm doing this for my purification. I'm doing this to make my mind peaceful. I'm not thinking that the body of my husband is enjoyable because, you know what? It's just a bunch of blood and mucus and bones covered by skin and hair. And no matter how many muscles he has and whatever, it's just not, it's not enjoyable. But this is my service. My service to Krishna is to take care of this jiva in the form of a husband. My service to Krishna is to take care of this jiva in the form of a wife. My service to Krishna is to take care of these jivas in the form of children. I love Krishna first, and because I love Krishna, therefore I can love my family members, as Prabhupada said to me. As a service, not as a sacrifice, as a transactional sacrifice. Someone was saying to me the other day, oh, my spouse told me, I don't really love you, it's just my sacrifice. And therefore you're indebted to me for sacrificing so much for you. That's tamagun, not like that. But one should do a service. And we should have a desire to awaken our real self. Prabhupada would say over and over and over again, if you still think that you're this body, you remain a Kanista Adhikari, you remain a Prakrita Bhakta. Don't stay on that platform. Try to realize that we're actually a soul, a servant of Krishna. Try to act on the spiritual platform. The purpose of our japa, the purpose of our kirtan, the purpose of our reading the Shastra is to try to awaken, I am Jivara Swarupaya Nitya Krishna Das. I am a servant of Krishna. And if we do that, Prabhupada assures us that at some point our specific relationship with Krishna will awaken. He promises us that. And at that point, then we inner cultivate that while externally remaining as a sadhaka. And I was really meditating on the glories of Srila Prabhupada. How Srila Prabhupada gave us this philosophy without falling into any of these traps. If you read Srila Prabhupada's books, you listen to Prabhupada's lectures, and following Srila Prabhupada is not just saying Jai Jai Prabhupada. It's one of my pet peeves. The Jai 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 Jai. But it really means absorbing ourselves in his teachings, absorbing ourselves in his mood, his perspective. If I want to attain transcendence without being tripped up by any of these, Srila Prabhupada is very safe. You read Krishna book, you read Nectar Devotion, you read Upadeshamrita, you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, that is full of Krishna's intimate pastimes, but you'll not become bewildered. And therefore, we could give Krishna book, we could give Nectar Devotion, we could give Upadeshamrita to materialistic people out on the street. And they would not become bewildered into any of these misconceptions. And in fact, by that association with Srila Prabhupada, like Rukmini Devi, and this is the second time she's saying this, all of us can taste the honey of Krishna's lotus feet, as so nicely Srila Rupa Goswami's poem, Krishna Deva Bhavantam Bande, that let my mind like a bee become offered at your feet, which are full of lotuses of nectar. So questions, comments, corrections, chastisements. I really worked to get that all in time. Thank you, Krishna. Yes, Maharaj. Yeah, Rukmini's thinking her spiritual body is material. Yes, I'm just repeating for the internet people. Maharaj is saying Rukmini was thinking her spiritual body was material because she was extremely humble. Yes. That actually, one of the biggest signs that someone is actually spiritually advanced is they feel unqualified. If a person comes and says, yes, I'm very advanced, I've realized that immediately you have a red flag and say, no, this is not the real thing. They realize they're qualified. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai.